to you.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the University of Maine at Machias series, Wabanaki Voices. My name is Jennifer Isherwood. I work with Native American students at UMaine Machias and also work for Wabanaki Youth and Science as a science educator. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to convey greetings from Megan Walsh, who's the Dean and Campus Director at UMaine Machias. She sends her regrets on missing this event because it is accepted student day on campus at UMaine Machias. So, but our guest and speaker today is familiar to many of you. Morgan Talty is a Penobscot Indian Nation citizen and prize-winning author of Night of the Living Rez. He grew up in and around Indian Island, Maine, and lives in the state now, not far from the university. And Morgan's an assistant professor now of English and creative writing and Native American contemporary literature at the University of Maine, Orono, and he is, I believe, still on the faculty at the Stonecoast MFA program in creative writing, as well as Institute of American Indian Arts. Talty is Prose Editor at the Massachusetts Review, that's still current, and his work has appeared in Granta, the Georgia Review, Shenandoah, TriQuarterly, Native Narrative Magazine, LitHub, and probably many other places. So I'm going to give it over to Morgan, who is going to read, generously read from his work for a while, and then we'll open it up for questions. Go ahead, Morgan. You ready?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It feels earlier than noon. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I've been up for quite a while. But I'm excited to be here and excited to read and to talk about Night of the Living Rez. So I thought before we did any Q&A or conversations, I'd read for a little bit. Probably read 3 different sections, and yeah, so I'll dive right in. The first piece I'll read is Burn, which is the opening story to Night of the Living Rez, and I feel like Burn really kind of sets the tone for the book really well. So yeah, I'll obviously just start there. Burn. Burn. Make sure I'm not muted. Okay. Burn. Winter. When I walk the sidewalk at night along banks of hard snow. I'd come from Rab's apartment off the reservation. Rab, this white guy with a wide mouth and eyes that closed up when he laughed, sold pot. He was all no bullshit too. I had asked for a gram, and after he weighed it and put it in a plastic bag and held it out to me, I reached into my pants and jacket pockets looking for the cash among the cigarette wrappers and pocket knife. And he didn't believe me as I acted the part and kept saying, shit, it must have fell out on the walk over here. He shook his head, took the weed out of the bag, and he put it back into his mason jar. I ain't smoking you up, he said. And so then I said, fuck you, Rab, I really did lose the money. You'll see. Watch when I come back here in 30 minutes with the money I dropped. You'll feel stupid then. He shrugged a sorry man, and I slammed his door shut as I left. At the bridge to the reservation, the river was still frozen, ice shining white and blue under a full moon. The sidewalk on the bridge hadn't been shoveled since the last nor'easter crapped snow in November, and I walked in the boot prints everyone made who walked the walk to Overtown to get pot or catch the bus to wherever it was that Skeegans had to go, which wasn't anywhere because everything we needed, except pot, was on the res. Well, except Best Buy or Bed Bath & Beyond, but those natives who bought 4K Ultra DVDs or fresh white doilies had cars, wouldn't be taking the bus like me or Phyllis did each day to the methadone clinic. That was another thing the res didn't have, a methadone clinic. But we had sacred grounds where sweats and peyote ceremonies happened once a month. Except since I had chosen to take methadone, I was ineligible to participate in native spiritual practice, according to the doc on the res. Natives damning natives. The roads on the res were quiet, trees bending under the weight of snow, and when I passed the frozen swamp, a voice moaned out. I stopped walking. Nothing, so I kept on going on the sparkling road until I heard it again. Who's that? I yelled. The moan came again. It was a man, somewhere in the swamp. I got closer, listening. There it was, a low and breathy noise, and with my cold ear I followed it. The swamp was frozen solid, the snow blown in piles, and so I slid over the ice, looking for the source of the noise. Moonlight through bare tree limbs lit the swamp, and caught among the tree stumps and solid snow was a person sprawled out on the ground. He was trying to sit up but kept falling back, like he'd just done 1,000 crunches and was too sore to do just one more. It was Fellis. Fellis, I said, standing over him. He tried to sit up, but something pulled him back down. Fuck you, Fellis said, help me. He groaned, shivered. He didn't say how to help him, so I had to squat down to get a better look. I flicked my lighter and his purple lip quivered. Hurry, he said. Fellis, I said, I can't help you if I don't know what's the matter with you. My hair, he said. I looked at it with the lighter's flame. Holy, I said, and I laughed. Instead of the tight braid that shined, Fellis's hair had come undone, and it was frozen into the snow. Get me out, D, he said. D, get me out. At first, I tried to pull the hair out from the snow, tried to chip the snow away, but his hair wouldn't come loose, so I yanked, and Fellis screamed. Lift your head up, I said. I opened my pocket knife, and at the click of the blade, Fellis spoke. Wait, he said. Don't cut it. What do you want me to do, I said. Tell the ice to let go? Fellis spit. Go to my house and get boiling water. I closed the pocket knife. Fellis, I said, by the time I got back here, the water would be chilled. He was quiet, as if something walked around or among us. The ice cracked and echoed somewhere in the swamp. The moon shone bright and I looked. There was nobody but us. I have to cut it, I said. You ain't getting out if I don't. Fellis asked if I had a cigarette. When I told him no, he cursed. Fucking bullshit, fucking goddamn winter, what the fuck? I laughed. It ain't funny, D. Look, I said, you want me to cut my braid too? Fellis took a deep breath and he coughed and he gagged. No, he said, just cut it. I gotta get home. I'm sick. I opened the pocket knife again, grabbed his hair in a fistful and cut. When I got to the last bit of hair, Fellis rolled over and away from where he'd been stuck. He rubbed his head like he just woke up. I helped him stand, and we slipped all over the ice on our way out of the swamp. Through dry heaves, Fellis said he'd missed the bus this morning to the methadone clinic. No shit, I said, because I didn't see him on the bus or at the clinic. And he thought some booze would be good before he got sick from not having any methadone. He'd had a bit of booze left that afternoon, but he decided to go see Rab to get some pot. And on the way, he'd stopped off in the swamp to feel the quiet that came with too much drinking. And when he plopped down in the snow, he dozed right off. When he woke up, his hair was frozen in the snow. I got him to his mom's, Beth's, where he still lived. He walked fine by himself to the door, but I walked with him up the steps. I never thought I'd scalp a fellow tribal member, I said. Fuck off, he said. He fumbled in his pocket for his house key. You want to smoke, I asked. Didn't you listen, he said. I didn't make it to Rab's. He unlocked the door. I'll go for you, I said. Give me the cash. Fellis looked at me. 20 minutes, I said. I'll run there and back while you warm up your pretty bald head. He gave me $30, and I didn't ask where he got it from. Yesterday, he said he didn't have any money. 20 bag, Fellis said, and stop at Jim's and get some tall boys and a bag of chips. Any kind but Humpty Dumpty chips. Down Fellis's driveway, I imagined the look on Rab's face when I gave him the money. What'd I tell you? How about that gram? D, Fellis yelled. One more thing. Bring me my hair so we can burn it. Don't want spirits after us. We're damned anyway, I said. I guess I'll get your hair. I kept going, wondering. Hair or pot first? Pot made the most sense. It would look strange having to set the hair and ice down like a soaked mop on the counter at Jim's while I reached in my pocket for Fellis's money. Jim, that old wood booger, would say, we don't take those anymore. I'd look him square in his sagging face and say, I'm not trading no hair, you old fucker. And I'd smack down on the counter a $10 bill for the tall boys and chips. With the change jingling in my pocket, I'd walk to Rab's and he'd say, get that hair out of here, it's dripping on my floor. And I'd have to plop the hair on the muddy white floor in the hallway while Rab reweighed the same nugs he'd weighed earlier for me. No. I'd grab Fellis's hair from the swamp on my way home. With Fellis on his unmade bed, me on a torn beanbag in the corner, each of us with a tall boy in the pot smoke haze and gray the room, we'd keep poking and squeezing the hair, waiting for it to dry, waiting to burn it. So thank you. That's Burn. That's the opening story. That's the so I imagine most folks are familiar with the book, but the Night of Living Rez is narrated by the same character in these 12 stories. And here we see D, and it's this older sort of older man who's, you know, obviously addicted to substances. And in the next story, In a Jar, which I'll read a small snippet from because I always like reading that. We see D as a boy, and he goes by David. And that's not a spoiler, by the way, I promise. So this next section is if I can find it, hold on, sorry. So this next section is from In a Jar. When we get, it's the second story, and it really sort of like gets everybody, sort of grounds the reader with, the past history of David and his family coming to the Penobscot Nation, and escaping sort of a situation that was not good for them. And so David arrives with his mom to the reservation, and we meet Frick, who's another character, and we meet Paige, who's David's sister, who's much older than him, maybe like 10 years, and she ultimately shows up. And this section features they go to church basically, and I always feel like I have to tell this story, but I went and did a reading in maybe Bath or Belfast, Maine, and the bookstore couldn't accommodate the number of people that were there, so they moved the event to the church like right up the road. And I was like walking down the middle aisle, and like this just demonstrates that context is everything. Like I was walking down the middle aisle, and up front next to like the podium area was like a square table with this beautiful set of flower arrangements, and then just my picture. And so it kind of thought I was like at my own funeral. Like it was really weird. And it was the strangest thing ever, and I just had to point it out. But yeah, for like that whole reading, I was like, I don't know if I'm dead or alive. It was very strange. And plus it was like near the tail end of like my book tour, so I was exhausted already, and I was like, I don't know, it's crazy, but context is everything. It really, really is. So this is from In a Jar. The only things you need to know is that Paige, David's sister, and Mom, the mom character, got into a fight, and Mom sort of went and locked herself in the room. And the only other thing is that David lost a toy figurine, a red alien figurine behind their concrete steps early on, and that's really it. And so here is Grammy just arriving unannounced, as all grandmothers in every place does. The door was open, and so Grammy came in. I hopped off the couch. "Hi, son," she said. I gave her a hug. Paige turned off the sink faucet and dried her hands. "When do you get here, Duz?" Grammy said to Paige. "A little while ago," she said. Grammy walked over the linoleum with her shoes on and gave Paige a hug that said, "It's nice to see you." "Where's your mom?" she asked. "She's not feeling well," Paige said. Grammy looked up the hallway. "Something she ate," Paige said. Grammy said, "Mm-hmm." She stood in the doorway, and Paige asked if she wanted to sit down. No, Grammy said. "I was coming to see if David wanted to go to the evening service at the church." She looked at me, and in looking at me, I was compelled to say yes. She was my Grammy after all, but I didn't want to go alone with her, not because of her, but because it was church. "I'll go if Paige goes," I said. Paige dropped her head and shoulders, shook her head. She went to her bedroom and changed. Grammy's car was a puttering two-door piece of rusted metal. I thought Paige's car was bad, but Grammy's was something else. The engine made this whining sound every few minutes, like a bomb siren. Her turn signals worked, but on the dashboard it didn't say if they were on or off. So sometimes she drove with her turn signal on for miles. Maybe she knew. Maybe she was messing with other drivers. Also, the radio turned on and off by itself, and after we drove in silence past the small health clinic and the large tin-looking community building, the tribal offices tucked behind thick pine trees, and the tan brick school and the football field, we pulled into the church parking lot, and the radio kicked on and blared out Meredith Brooks's "Bitch," and Paige bobbed her head, telling Grammy to turn it up, but she flicked the radio off. "Michiganasu," Grammy said, "the shitty thing." We got out of the car, and Grammy hurried in front of us. Paige walked by my side and whispered about books, evil spirits. They follow Grammy around, she said to me. That's why the radio turned on. I tried not to be scared, but I was. Paige always talked about Guguk's, and one reason why I never stayed at Grammy's house was because Paige said it was haunted. When I told Mom that, she said the whole island was haunted, that years and years and years ago our people used this place as a graveyard, that even late at night she heard Guguk's tapping on the walls. Mom told me not to be scared. In the church, we took our seats and I thumbed through the Bible in front of me. Other than that, I didn't pay attention to anything, just watched people here and there, some with their eyes closed, some open. I didn't think Paige was listening either. Her head was turned sideways, eyes half open, like the priest's word was putting her to sleep. After we lined up to receive the body of Christ, which I wasn't allowed to ingest and instead received a pat on the head from the priest because Mom hadn't had me baptized, we returned to our seats. Paige nudged me. Grammy watched, hand on her chest, as Paige broke her cracker in half and gave it to me. It dissolved in my mouth and it tasted like a chalky cracker that had gotten wet and dried again. Paige saw the disgust in my face and she whispered, "It's the best Jesus could do." "Jesus made this?" I said. Paige had her arms crossed. I know, right? Grammy told us to shut the heck up. Church dragged on. When we had to kneel, we knelt. When we had to sing, we sang. When we had to pray, we prayed. Grammy probably prayed for God to forgive Paige, and Paige probably prayed for a cigarette. Me, I prayed for the safe return of my alien figure in his red spacesuit. I still felt bad that he was all alone under those steps, buried in the cold mud, and I prayed that the changing seasons would churn him out to the surface and I'd find him one day. Toward the end of the service, we knelt one last time, saying one more prayer, but I didn't pray for anything because I couldn't focus. I smelled a stinky piggity, a fart. I had my eyes cracked open, looking, and I felt Paige looking too. We made eye contact, and she leaned toward me. "David," she whispered, and she pointed at the upholstered cushioned wood we knelt on. "You ever wonder why they call this a pew?" I puckered my lips, felt my face getting hot. I bit my tongue, using the pain to distract me from laughing. Grammy was looking at us, shaking her head, and it looked like she too was trying not to laugh. And when Paige saw Grammy's face, Paige let out a little croak of laughter, loud enough for the priest to hear, loud enough to turn heads, loud enough for the person who ripped one to know they were caught. So that's the section from In a Jar that I always love reading, and I've read it in like several churches, and I always feel like some omnipresent power is going to come down and like strike me. I don't know. It's always very unsettling. The last piece I'd like to read is a bit longer, and this one is called Safe Harbor. And this story is about Dee visiting his mother in a crisis stabilization unit, which are places where people who are not feeling quite well or who are in a state of crisis can go and have access to resources they need, but mainly to get out of that crisis. So there's usually a bed and, you know, things for them to do. There's meals, there's, you know, there's food, there's all of those types of things. And so this is called Safe Harbor. I'm sitting at the weathered picnic table under the gazebo in back of the crisis stabilization unit, and it smells like rain. My mother's walking to get 2 cups of coffee. I don't watch her. I'm too busy watching the short and skinny exterminator walk across the grass against the building's foundation. He's dressed in a white coverall, and he's checking the black boxes filled with poison, rodent bait boxes. I don't think he looks at me, but he knows I'm here. He has to see me. I wonder if he thinks I belong here. The crisis stabilization unit is 30 minutes away from the reservation. To get to the unit, I pass McDonald's and a thrift store before I take the highway for most of the drive. Exit ramp, red light, always a red light. I have to turn left, so I always have to wait. Then I turn, drive straight, school zone, drive slow. I cross a black and blue tagged bridge before cutting through a brick city, one-way roads, then some trees, more trees. The unit is coming up. Right turn. The unit is down a bumpy and cracked side road, away from the busy part of town. Against the wood, sharp pine trees clutter and lean into each other, and cardinals and finches flutter and jet from tree to tree. The unit isn't large. Inside, there's the staff desk. To the right of it, a long hallway filled with bedrooms, rooms simple in decor that say relax. A bed with clean linen, a nightstand and a lamp and a dresser, thin white curtains. To the left of the staff desk is the living room and kitchen and TV room with maroon chairs and a quiet room where people can paint and draw or sit and read. A whiteboard is screwed to the wall in the living room, and in blue marker, a quote is written: "A ship in harbor is safe, but that is not what ships are built for." Like human beings are ships, as if they were crafted things, things that rock and bang or cruise smooth in an unpredictable ocean of salt and froth and depth. Out there is natural extermination. The back door creaks open, then bangs shut. My mother's shoes crunch the grass. The exterminator is gone around the building. Here, Mom hands me the coffee. It's too hot to sip, so I blow and blow on it, but it doesn't cool. Thanks for the cigarettes, Mom says. That's why I'm here, to bring her cigarettes. That's why I'm always here when she's here, to bring her cigarettes. I never don't bring her cigarettes. I blow on my coffee again. It's too hot to sip. Mom asked me if I heard from your sister. And after I tell her no, she makes a noise with her throat and then asks me what's new. Nothing, I tell her. And then she goes into it, why she's here again, the 12th time in the past 3 months. I didn't want to be alone, she tells me. The walls in my bedroom started to look black and grimy. I ask her if she's out of her meds, clozapam, benzos. She says she gets them filled tomorrow. Only sometimes she takes her meds. She runs out because she needs money, always needs cigarettes. But I have Valium, she says. It still won't help me sleep. I can't sleep. She tells me she's been awake for 3 days. She doesn't look it though. Her short gray hair is spiked. She's wearing little gold earrings. She's dressed nice, casual, a white t-shirt and black yoga pants and white sneakers. She doesn't do yoga. All of the white on her makes her look more native, more Indian. She hates that word, Indian, but nothing makes her look young. She's native and she has trauma. So do I, but she thinks she has more. She doesn't say that, but she thinks it. Maybe she's right. Maybe older natives have more trauma than younger ones. It takes a bit for me to warm up to her. Mom wanted cigarettes, and that morning on the phone, she also asked me to buy a pack for this woman here I don't know. Mom said the woman had cash, that she'd pay me. But during our call, Mom slipped up, said the woman didn't have the money yet, that she was waiting for her friend to show up who owed her. I wasn't playing that game, I told my mother. I'm so tired, my mother says. I want to sleep, but I can't. I'm not even here, I say, starting to warm up to her. Mom looks at me and then smiles. Shut up, she says. You're so tired, I'm an hallucination, I say. I smile a little. She's laughing now. She lost all her teeth years ago, but she has dentures, top only. She lost the bottom at a Dysart's restaurant last year, asked me to call them, which I did, and I asked if they found a pair at the back table. That was where she'd been sitting, she told me, next to an oil painting of green olives in a brown bowl. They didn't find any teeth. I pointed the 2 packs I brought her. You're going to reach for those cigarettes later, I tell her, thinking they're there, but they're not. I never even brought them. I'm laughing now. Stop that, Mom says. She's laughing. Then I'll call you tonight, I say, and ask if you still need those cigarettes. That does it. We're both laughing hard. It feels good to laugh with her. It feels like it scrapes the dark and grimy walls inside me. When we're done laughing, she says I'm a shit. Always were, she says. I wipe my eyes of laughing tears and then bring my coffee mug to my lips. It's still hot, and so I blow on it and then set it back down. When I do, Mom's getting up. I'm a little chilly, she says. She hasn't even smoked yet. Inside, we sit across from each other at the long kitchen table. An old man in a tan sweater is sitting there too, but at the end, he's eating a sandwich, hands shaking, and with each bite, his sleeve slides down his wrist to reveal a gold watch. He doesn't talk to us, doesn't look at us, and for a moment, a single tick of his watch, he becomes familiar. Do I know you, I want to ask. Perhaps he was here the last time I visited. That woman who wanted cigarettes is in the living room, watching the Maury show, fidgeting with her purple lighter. I wonder if she's mad at me because I didn't get her any cigarettes. From my seat at the table, the whiteboard and its blue quote snag my attention. If we're built things, I wonder, then who builds us? Mom and I are quiet. Then she starts asking if I've seen this movie with Adam Sandler. I think it's called Adults, she says. Yes, that's it. It's called Adults. We all watched it last night. By all, she means the others there with her, the others in crisis. I blow on my coffee and take a sip. It's warm, but I wish it were warmer. I let it cool for too long. I don't tell my mother that I know the movie, that she's wrong, that it's not called Adults, but something else. I don't tell her a lot of things, like how I couldn't pay half the rent, so my girlfriend left me and took her spaz cat with her. Mom hated my white girlfriend and would like it too much that she left. I don't tell Mom that I finally got the job driving truck for UPS. My father drove truck for them before Mom and he were married. They're divorced, have been for years, and my father's dead. Maybe that's why I don't tell Mom about the job. Don't want her to tell me not to be like my father. She's dramatic like that. It's a riot, Mom says about the movie. You have to see it. I say I'll check it out, that I bet it's funny, but I know I won't watch it. These days, when Mom talks, she's always looking for words. Something isn't right with her brain, the trauma. It's been that way for years, but she's taking longer than usual. Ma, I say. She looks at me, doesn't say anything. She straightens the two unopened packs of cigarettes on the table in front of her and sips her coffee. I'm so tired, Mom says. I haven't slept in 4 nights. See? First 3 nights and now 4. She's dramatic, has to up everything. I wonder if she has slept or if she's lying. The front door buzzer rings and one of the staff, a woman with wide hips and a small head, asks through the intercom who she's here to see. That woman who wanted me to bring her a pack of cigarettes is standing up now, watching the door. I get a good look at her. Her name's Meryl, I think. Mom said that she looks pregnant, but that she isn't. I look at Meryl and she peeks at the door. She looks pregnant. I wonder if one of them is lying. It's my friend, Meryl says to the staff. The door buzzes and opens. A cold draft rushes over the floor and brushes my ankles like water. I wonder why her friend didn't get Meryl cigarettes. Mom asks if I want my coffee heated. I say yes. She heats hers too in the microwave. Again, when she brings the heated coffee, I blow and blow on it, watch the steam swirl and feel it dampen my upper lip and nose. It's too hot to sip. I don't want the coffee. I want to leave, but I wait before I say anything. She just heated my coffee up. Mom's talking again and I'm listening. She's saying she hopes she sleeps tonight. God, she says, I need some sleep. My coffee's too hot to sip, but I want to leave, want to get home. For what? I lose the place in 2 days and no one's there. Emptier than the litter box. But I want to get away, and so I drink the hot coffee in 4 sips and burn the shit out of my mouth. I don't mean to rush, I say to Mom. The coffee mug thuds when I set it down, but I have to get going. I know you do, Mom says. I appreciate you're bringing me some smokes. She pats the top of her packs on the table. Meryl's friend is gone, and Meryl's standing near the long kitchen table. I have that money, she tells me, if you don't mind getting me a pack. I don't know if I mind, but I'll go get the cigarettes. Meryl looks at Mom. Is that okay? Maybe Meryl doesn't know I'm leaving, doesn't know I said I have to get going. Maybe she thinks she's interrupting us. Mom doesn't say anything, stares at Meryl. There's a gas station right at the end of the road, Meryl tells me. I don't tell her I know that. I can get them, I say to her. I'll go right now. Meryl's looking at Mom, though, waiting for Mom to answer her, like my going depends on my mother's letting me. Then Meryl speaks again. Is it okay if he runs to the store for me? Mom's not saying anything. She's tired. I think she's looking for a word. Ma, I say? Nothing. Mom doesn't look at either of us, and then slowly her head turns and twists until she's looking up at the ceiling, and this noise like a screaming child comes from her mouth. And the next thing I do is say, Mama, wondering what the hell she's doing. But then she goes straighter and straighter in the chair, like she's wood, a 2x4 leaning against it, and I rush around the table and hold her. I say, Mama, what's wrong? She doesn't say anything, and her arms are tightening, curling up toward her throat. She's convulsing. I yell to the staff, tell them to help. Meryl's standing there, arms crossed, watching. She rolls her eyes, fucking bitch. The staff run over. One staff woman tells Meryl to go into the TV room. She does. Then the staff woman goes outside, tells the people under the gazebo to stay outside, that there's a problem. They all do. The staff woman with the wide hips and the small head is on the phone, on the other side of my mother, helping me hold her in place. The other staff woman is on the phone with 911. She's having a seizure, the small-headed woman says to the other on the phone. My mother is shaking, frothing from the mouth, spinning. I watch the spit land on the small woman's face. I think my mother is choking. How long, the woman on the phone says. About a minute long, the small-headed woman says. She's coming out now. My mother's breathing is slowing, catching. I'm holding on. My mother is loosening, struggling to sit up as if it were the first time she ever rose, ever used her muscles. I'm rubbing her back, and I'm thinking about the cigarettes and the voicemails about the cigarettes she always wants. Right then, I tell myself I will always bring her cigarettes. Right then, I tell myself I'll watch that movie with Adam Sandler. Tell them she's out of her clozapam, the small-headed woman says. That could be why. A lack of benzos, and she hasn't slept in 3 days. I'm rubbing my mother's back, but she has Valium, I think. She told me she has Valium. Different, but a benzo. Why doesn't she tell 911 about the Valium? My mother is sitting, and I am holding her, rubbing her back. She looks at me, tries to speak, but she can't. She can't find coherence. Her sentences are mumbled. A puddle is under the chair. Who, my mother is saying. It's coming, what she wants to say. Piece by piece, she swashes on shore. She's looking at me. Who, you? I'm your son, I say. She's scared, is unsure what I tell her. I don't repeat to her that I'm her son. I say my name instead, and her mouth and tongue move as if I taught her an unpronounceable word, like Isthmith or Worcestershire. But she tries to say it again and again, failing each time. Then she gives up and starts to whisper to herself, I need better. I need to get better. It's her first coherent sentence. The ambulance arrives, 7 EMTs. They ask my mother questions. She cannot answer them, and in that she is truthful. They put my mother on a gurney and pull her to the front door. Not one of them tells me where they're taking her. They don't know I'm her son. Even my mother doesn't know I'm her son. When I try to follow them out the front door, an EMT with thin lips puts his hand up, tells me to stop, says I'm not clear to leave. He thinks I belong here. By a dirty white van, double doors open, the exterminator cleans the black boxes. I can't tell if he watches. I pretend the EMT is right, and I wait for them to leave. Through the closed front doors, the EMTs load the gurney with Mom into the ambulance, and the doors slam shut. The woman with the small head is shaking when she asks if I'm okay. I tell her I am. Then she says they took my mother to St. Vincent's. The puddle is still on the floor. It's flowing down and away from the table, a river or an ocean. Both packs of cigarettes I bought my mother are gone, and I look through the window out back at the gazebo, and Meryl is outside with the others, smoking. In the parking lot of the crisis stabilization unit, I lean for a while in the green car I borrowed from a friend. Eventually, Mom calls my cell from the ER. She says she had a seizure. I know, I tell her. I was there. What? She says. I thought you left. I tell her I was getting ready to leave, that Meryl wanted me to get cigarettes for her. I tell her almost everything, how it all happened. But I don't tell her that I thought she was dying. I don't tell her how much my legs shook, how my voice quivered when I said, Mama, Mama, Mama. I don't tell her how little and alone I felt. I don't tell her how I'll always bring her cigarettes, how I'll watch that movie for sure. I do tell her, though, that she didn't know anything when she woke, that she couldn't speak, that she couldn't tell the EMTs what day it was or when she was born or who the president is. Maybe it's good, I tell her, that she didn't know who our president is, and she laughs at that. I tell her she didn't know where she was. I tell her that she didn't know me, didn't recognize me. Of all the details I tell her, she clings to that one only. How did I not know my baby, she says with a sharp breath. It's okay, I tell her, even though it's not. She says the doctor's coming, that he wants to run some tests. I'll be by soon, I say. What? She says. The emergency room, I say. I'll be by soon. We say goodbye, hang up. I knock on the front door of the crisis center. They buzz me in. One staff woman is cleaning the puddle off the floor and the other is sitting behind the desk. I've lost something, I say, and I go out back to the gazebo. Meryl isn't there with my mother's cigarettes. The old man who was shaking while he ate his sandwich is sitting outside, smoking a long Camel 100. I bum a smoke from him and light it with the red of his lit one. You don't look so good, he says to me. You shake like me, he lifts both hands. I don't say anything. The old man picks up his cup of coffee and sips it. Damn cold, he says. Let me heat that for you. I set my cigarette on the picnic table, the lid end dangling off. I take his cup. I wonder if he watches me leave, watches me go inside. I wonder if he gives a shit. I put the coffee in the microwave and set it for 44 seconds. I walk to the front door and go out and stand in the parking lot. The exterminator is still here, 8 black boxes at his feet. They're laced by a rope as if they were fresh meat. You supposed to be out front? He asked me. I say nothing and get in the car, start it in reverse. I throw it in drive and peel out, and the back right tire thuds over one or two black boxes that crack French. In the rearview mirror, the exterminator throws his arms into the air and he runs to the front door to tell the staff. Forget him. Ahead, to the north, I'm drawn to the dark blue clouds like mold, the spray of rain and wind and yellow lightning soon to come over this part of our swell. It drizzles, and halfway to the hospital, I remember my dangling cigarette in the old man's coffee. Remembered that I was supposed to bring it to him, and I'm thinking and thinking and thinking at 65 miles per hour on this smooth residential road until an empty playground, the red swings rocking in the now heavy rain, catches my attention, my breath, and when I step forward and exhale, my car clips a brown telephone pole and spirals onto a cracked concrete lot. Glass shatters and the tumbling momentum flings me and the world upside down, right side up, and the car and me slide with blue skidding sparks and with the taste of rust in my mouth. And then the car rolls, scrapes, rolls to a stop. The green car was on its side and one small wind could push it on top of me. And so no wonder I want to free my leg from where it's trapped under the side of the car. And when I do, there is no pain, not unlike childhood and red swings and returnables of all hard glass and laughter and the good feelings there in the dark. And when I look at my leg, the skin is peeled back, my pulsing knee to my face, and I grab the flap of skin and flip it over my exposed bone. And have you ever tried to walk in such a time of great rupture? The rain is thick, wet, and cold. The car hisses, steams. The trees and their limbs rustle like my fingers shake. I rise and take but one step, and on the ground I drag myself to the road, and there is already a hand on my shoulder turning me over, and I see the line of cars with people marching to me, a dozen ships of ideas aiming for this shore once again. As they did with Mom, the EMTs grab me and lift me and settle me and poke me and quiet me, and I recognize the man who would not let me leave, and I say something, something, something to him, but his thin lips shush me and he pokes me again, and I sit up to see my skin covered with a red cloth. And time lurches forward with such speed to the emergency room that I'm there in a bustling room, white curtain pulled closed and blue soft masks floating about me. And it goes how it should go. The pain is hitting and a woman is yelling for her baby. And I feel bad that she lost that baby. Hope she finds it. And before I'm put under to the sound of her screaming behind the curtain, I grab the doc by the sleeve, say to the doc, "Does my mother know I'm here?" Thank you. So yeah, I suppose we can open the floor to questions or anything at all.
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. It's wow. Yeah. Yeah, everyone feel free to ask however way you want. Unmute yourself or put it in the chat. In Morgan's experience, he said that people tend to be more shy on Zoom, but please don't, be
True.
However way you want to ask anything, and keep that open. And I also have some questions. Maybe I can start things up. What are you working on right now? Morgan. Well,
We just sit in silence for like a half hour. That works too. I mean,
I think you froze for a half a second.
oh,
Yeah. But I asked just to get things rolling. What are you working on right now that you're?
So right now I'm working on, well, I'm finishing edits for a novel that comes out next summer called Fire Exit, which it's so hard to describe the book. I feel like the saying goes is like never ask a novelist or a writer what their story's about because they can never tell you. But this book is about, it's not about blood quantum, but it uses blood quantum as a means to get the story going. It's basically about it's told from the point of view of a non-native guy who grew up on the Penobscot Nation, whose mom married in, and this was in the 60s, I want to say 1960s, and he was like 2 years old, and he grew up there. I grew up on the Penobscot Nation, and I had a number of friends who were not native, whose parents had married in, and so he ends up being friends with this girl, and time passes, and as they get older, ultimately they have a baby together, and she is only a quarter blood, and so that would make their child ineligible to be enrolled in the tribe and considered native by the federal government. And so she ultimately lies and says that the baby belongs to another man who has native blood, so the child could be considered native. And purely by coincidence, he managed to buy property right across the river from where she married that other man, and so he watched his daughter grow up across the river. And so it's him telling this story, and like there's sort of like two sort of timelines going on, and I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but it's really about like the book is really about intergenerational trauma. It doesn't try to answer this question of who's native and who's not, but it just sort of positions it out there, because I feel like like even in Burn, for example, I have that line where it's like natives damning natives. I feel like there's like we need to talk about we need to continue talking about those like cowboy and native narratives, right? We need to continue discussing how non-natives treat indigenous people, both socially but also politically. But we also, I think, need to begin thinking about how we ourselves treat one another, right? And I think that's a big theme of Night of the Living Rez, and it's a theme that I think is carried over in Fire Exit to a degree. So yeah, it's about blood quantum. It's about a lot of things, but I'm working on edits for that, and the book's almost there. Me and my editor are doing some final tweaks. So yeah, that'll be my summer, which will be fun.
That's admirable that you've had time to do that with all that's going on in your life. That's really...
Luckily I got most of it done before everything happened. I haven't looked at the book for a few months now, so who knows what I'm walking into.
Yeah. I can read the questions from the chat, Morgan, or I don't know if you can you see them too?
I can see them, yeah.
Imagine that you could, but I mean, you could answer however order you want, or however way you would like.
Yeah, we can just go in order. So this one here, what led you to this series of short stories? This can be a very long or a short answer. I think it was in 2015, wrote a story when I was taking a workshop when I was getting my bachelor's degree, and the story was called Night of the Living Rez, and that's the title of the book, and it's also the title of the story in the book. And that draft that is in the book is like, a lot's been changed, but I wrote this story, about 8 years ago, and I took a semester off between my undergrad and then going to get my MFA in fiction. And during that time, I wrote a little bit, kind of just when inspiration kind of like called to me, and I continued writing with that character David. And I wrote Smokes Last and another story called It's All There, which isn't in the book, but was about David and his grandmother. And so in a way, it was like a blueprint for the Blessing Tobacco and their relationship, and other stories as well. So I had those stories, and I went into my MFA program, and I was like, well, I have these stories, I might as well do a story collection. And so I was like, the way I saw it was like, okay, well, I have David as like an 18-year-old in Night of the Living Rez, and then in Smokes Last, he's maybe like 15 or something. So I saw this like opportunity, and then It's All There, he was a little bit younger. So I saw this opportunity to use chronology, and I was like, all right, well, what if I just start with David as a young boy and I move all the way to Night of the Living Rez? So I did that. I wrote like 15 stories, all told from David's point of view. I chose 10 of the best, put it together, looked at the book and went, wow, this sucks. And it just was not a good book. It was really boring. It was the same, like, that's the thing with story collections, is like, there's two types of story collections. There's like the traditional story collection where every story is different. There's no recurring characters. Like the main thing that might stay consistent throughout, and it usually is this, is like theme, right? A theme of grief or, you know, love, or all of these or several themes. And then there's interconnected story collections, which is what mine was. But the thing with interconnected story collections is there has to be like a tiny arc. There has to be something. The way I define it is like a novel is like if you read a novel is a power line that is above ground, like you can see it. But an interconnected story collection is like a buried power line. You can't see it, but you know it's there, and you know it's, you know, giving power throughout, and it's not distracting. It's not getting in the view of anything. And so I didn't have that, and I was like, oh, well, that sucks. I guess this just failed. And I was like, whatever, I'll just go do something else. And I'd heard this story about this guy getting his hair frozen in the snow, this native guy. And I was like, I'm going to write that. And I'd been hearing this I'd been hearing this name Fellis as like a character in my head. And I was like, I'll use him. So I wrote the story in first person, and I got to the line where Fellis says, get me out, D. Fellis said, D. No, get me out, D. Fellis said, D, get me out. And at that line, I knew, like, just for like rhythm purposes, like I needed to name the narrator. Like I needed Fellis needed to say that character's name. And my instinct was to say David, because I was like, I had written, you know, for so long in his point of view, you know, I was just used to it. But I was like, no, this is not him. I'm not doing that. This is something else. Like that project failed. And so I just put the letter D in as a placeholder. And I revised the story. It was done. The only thing that was left was to figure out the name of this character. And I was convinced it had to start with D. So I was like, what is it? Daryl, Darren, I don't know, other D names. And I kept saying the letter D over and over. I was like, D, 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 D. Until finally I just realized, I was like, what if I just called him D? Like, what if that was his name? I put 2 E's after it. And I did that. And at that very moment, I was kind of like, wait a minute. I stopped resisting it. I was like, wait a minute. I was like, what if this is David all grown up? And it was sort of like this light bulb moment where I was like, if this is David all grown up, then the question now is what happened? So then I found my power line that was underground, and I started writing all these D and Fellis stories. And if you pay attention, not if you pay attention, but if you look at the book, like all the David stories, like they're chronological, like you can't move them, they're fixed. But if you look at the D and Fellis stories, they're pretty like flexible. Like, so I didn't think about time at all with those. Like I was free of that, like that. You know, I'd use that as a scaffold to write the first draft. So I wrote all these D and Fellis books and stories, and then I was like, all right, well, now I'll take 5 of the David ones and 5 of the D ones, and maybe I'll do like a D story, a David story, a D story, a David story. And I remember laying all the stories out on the floor and like moving them and stuff, and it was fun. But really what led me to these series of stories was kind of wearing a blindfold. Like that's just how I work. Like I just like I'm sort of like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if this is going to turn into anything, but I'll just follow it and see what happens. And plus I just love short stories. I feel like I just feel like they're, I don't know, like novels are great. Don't get me wrong. I love novels, you know, I love other forms of storytelling, but short stories are just like, I don't know, you can pick it up and just, there's just so much power in it. And so, yeah, that's what led me to write this series of short stories.
That's great. Yeah.
I'm just looking at the second question. Elliot, I'm glad you love the book, and thanks for sharing that. That's a great question. You know, I feel like in the moment, none of them really felt like I couldn't, never felt like I could finish the stories. I think because like in my mind when I was writing these, I had reached a point where I realized it was work in a way, like to put these stories together. Like obviously you have to tap into emotion. You have to like feel these specific. You have to feel what the characters are feeling. I think to get things as right as possible. But none of them, none of them really. Were hard to write, I think, emotionally, or maybe made it so I couldn't get it done, with the exception of The Name Means Thunder, which is the very last story. That story, I don't know how long I worked on that story for, maybe like 2 years. And like I got it right, and it's just like that's like not writing it, like writing it I found very, very difficult because it deals with the death of a child, and the whole story, my problem is like I don't want this story's emotion to ride on the fact that a baby dies. Like I don't want the reader, I don't want to cheat in a way. Like I don't want to get a reader to feel only because of this one thing. And so like that story was one I couldn't get right for the longest time, and was like, I'm not putting it in the book. But eventually I was able to get it right, or I feel I did. But to this day, that story is, I think, like there's something about that story, because my mom passed away 2 years ago. And so like there's this line in The Name Means Thunder, which goes something like I dream a lot about Marla, especially now that mom is gone, or something, like just this quick line. And like even though she's not my mother, it like the way time passes through that story, it's just a very emotional one for me. So that one I think is the one that hits me the hardest, and is the saddest in a way, for that personal subjective way we read, but also for as a writer, for having written it. Oh, I wish I had set writing routines now. I used to. I oh, it skipped. Okay. Yeah, so for this book, actually, I had the luxury of being able to have a set writing time, usually between like 8 and 11, or 8 and 12. Because I was really only working like really just a little. I was working at Hassan in the writing center, or teaching. And so I would bring my wife to work. She was a pre-K teacher. I'd bring my wife to work, and then I'd go home, and then I would write, and then I'd go to work, and then I'd pick her up, and then at night I'd like edit. And so like that was my routine, and I would just sit at the kitchen table and write. But then with my novel, which I rewrote the entire draft of it, and that I did at Hassan most of the time. I would drop my wife at work, and then I would go to Hassan, and an hour before class I would just work on the book. So, and there was always this other guy that was sitting at the table. I don't know what he was doing. He was always studying or something, and it was really early too. It was like 6:37. And so my favorite time to write is before anybody's up. That's like my ideal time to write, like 4 or 5 or 6. There's just something about that time period that it's like I know everybody's sleeping, so I don't have to like, it just feels like there's no real pressure on me to do anything. And then slowly, when people start waking up, or like it's like 8 o'clock, then like the harsh realities of daily life hit you, like the tiny things, like unloading the dishwasher, or thinking about laundry, or now having to feed the baby, and like all of these things. It's just this quiet time for me. That's for me my favorite time to write. And I cannot handwrite anything because I have horrible handwriting, and I'm actually just a terrible speller, and so it just like demoralizes me to see me write a story by hand. Like I just feel like a loser. I'm like, am I a fraud? So I don't do that at all. So computer all the way.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I think, the biggest thing for me is, like, I don't know, I don't really write stories in a way to kind of, like, for me, the biggest, like, how do I say it, is like, all of us, I'm thinking of like Audre Lorde, saying, we have to celebrate our differences. And, I think that's true. Like, I think we have to celebrate our differences. We have to celebrate our similarities. And, in my fiction, I try to find the constant. I try to find the thing that, thank you, Phoebe. I think the thing that, for me, the one thing that binds every single person, or makes everybody the same, is the fact that we can feel, right? That we can feel, unless you're like a psychopath or something. But normally, like, we can all feel pain, we can all feel sadness, we can all feel happiness, we can feel all of these things. That is the constant. That's the thing that doesn't change. The thing that changes is what elicits that emotion, right? And so I always put the emotion first, and then I build, the reason why that emotion exists. And so for me, like, I feel like that's my way of getting around the idea of a readership. Who is your audience? And I feel like anybody who has a shred of human decency would like, and care for these characters. Like, that's how I treat them, as like real people. And so the biggest thing that I feel like I hoped my book, that people would take away from my book, was, a greater sense of, how do we care for one another, right? How can we do better by the people that seem to be, difficult in our lives? This book is full of people who have problems and are not, they're estranged family members and have been isolated and, sort of shut out by the others. And, I feel like this book kind of tries to parse everybody back together in a way. And like, that for me is like the biggest thing, is like, how can we learn to love one another better? Like, that is, I suppose, the book's takeaway, is like, how do we care for one another more than we already are right now? Yeah. So what led me to pursue writing professionally in the journey to your MFA? I hated writing and reading growing up. I just did not like it. I think it might have had to do with just the fact that my home life was a bit hectic and probably impeded my ability to focus on education. But I loved storytelling. I just did. I always loved storytelling. John Baer, who works at the University of Maine in Orono, was my native studies teacher for most of, growing up on Indian Island and going to school there. And I loved hearing oral stories, traditional stories. I also just loved hearing people tell stories about stuff that happened, and like, I loved telling stories. I loved with friends. I loved, I loved, just being able to tell stories. And it wasn't until I got to college and like was out of the environment that made it difficult for me to do well that I, discovered literature and reading. And I was like, the thing I love can be done in this way, just differently, right? There are different rules governing how stories work. And so I was like, well, what do I want to do with my life? And I was like, I'll try this. Why not? I love stories. Why not, try my hand at writing? And I had just a lot of people who always supported me, and, encouraged me to keep doing it. And I was really stubborn, and I just kept at it. And, I think I started writing when I was 18. I'm 32 now. So my book came out last summer. So, I mean, it took me, 13, no, is that right? 12, yeah, like 13 years to get a book published. It was a very, very long time. So yeah, and the journey to my MFA, I love my MFA. It was great to work with writers, and to learn from them and to also teach them in a way. I feel like I feel like students bring so much to the classroom as well. And I did my MFA obviously to write a full length piece and to get, I guess, that degree, but really I did it because I was like, I don't know what else to do. I don't want to sit behind a desk and work, 9 to 5 or anything. So I was like, I'll just get an MFA, why not?
That leads me to a question I had for you, Morgan. If you weren't writing and teaching, what would you like to do?
Oh God. I don't know. I mean, maybe there was a time where I thought about law school, and I did think about law school. The only other thing I could think of is like, I don't want to say like manual labor, but just like something with my hands. I say that like I work, like do stuff like that, but like growing up, I worked for a moving company during the summers, and like, as much as I hated it, there was just this like intense like validation of like having, I don't know, doing that type of work, which is, hard work. You do that for a week straight, your back's going to give out, and you see these guys who've been doing it for 30 years, just crazy. But I don't know, one of those two things, either a professional mover or a lawyer. complete different spectrum.
Yeah. No. Another thing I'm curious about is, what's it like teaching college? How has that been?
It's been great. It's good. I don't think I could teach anything below college. I'd probably get fired because I don't know, I swear a lot, and I'm just sort of like very non-traditional in the classroom. Like, I mean, I wear a beanie most of the time, and I don't know, like I feel like the classroom, it just needs to be really decolonized. Like I feel like there's just so many like rules or expectations, and yeah, but no, I love teaching. I love teaching literature courses, and I love teaching creative writing. I mean, for the longest time, I was teaching just college composition classes because I was an adjunct, and that I had fun with, but that's also really exhausting compared to like upper level, fiction writing seminars where students were like really engaged. So I love it. I really do. It's something I want to do, for the rest of my life, is same with writing. I've often thought, I'm like, well, I wonder if, writing, if I can support myself with writing, I feel like I'd still end up teaching in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one more comment from Xander.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know we've gone way over time, but if you all are still interested, I was kind of had a question for you.
Oh, we left it open, a little open-ended. So thanks, Jacob, for jumping on.
Great. Yeah, Morgan, I'm like 3/4 of the way through the book. And one of the things that struck me about the book, and I even realized in your reading of one of the stories, but it always seems like it's like early spring or late fall. There's a lot of cold mud and ice, and there's no descriptions of the weather like, oh, and it was beautiful and sunny. And so there's really this feeling around the weather that I can totally relate to right now. It's that time of year for me. But I was wondering if that was sort of intentional. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
No, I don't think it was intentional, to be honest. I really don't, it's not that I dislike summer, like I like summer, but it's always like, growing up, my summers were spent in Bridgeport, Connecticut with my dad. And so it was like, I was with my mom on the reservation for some of the summer, but most of the time I was with my dad. And so like, for me, like, I just love the fall. I love winter, and I love kind of like when we get into spring. Like right now, I don't really like it too much because it just looks terrible out. And it's like, I don't know, I just love snow. I like when the leaves are like dying and falling or colorful. And so I think because I liked those things so much, I was like, the book is only going to have 2 seasons, fall and, this time between winter and spring.
You captured it well. I felt it, and I also love all the seasons. So it's I'm not a big summer guy particularly, but it really it's palpable throughout the story. Just that transitional season and that a little on the harsh side of things.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if there's anybody else. I could ask a million more questions, but I don't want to keep you too long and you get a lot to do. But is there anything, I'll just end with this. Is there anything that you've done dozens of these, maybe hundreds at this point, that you get asked so many questions that you wish that people would ask you in these kinds of settings that like, I never asked me about that. And it's something that
yeah, no, nobody. I don't know. I feel like because I've been asked so many questions, like my brain is just like, I don't know what I've been asked and what I haven't been asked in a way. One of the things though, and nobody's ever asked me this, but I'll just share this. And but I read when the book first came out, I did a reading at through the Portland Public Library, and they did it at a brewery because of COVID, and like it just had a big open space, so that they would do events there. And I read there, and I was in conversation with Gregory Brown, who wrote The Lowering Days. I'm not sure if anyone's read that. And I was signing books, and I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Connor Quinn. He worked with I think in the 90s, he worked with the Penobscot Nation to build an alphabet. He's a linguist, he's non-native, and he's just a really great guy. And he did a lot of work for the tribe and working with elders and capturing the language and documenting it. And at the end of that reading, in the signing, he came up and we were just chatting because we know each other. And he was like, I couldn't help but, I couldn't help but read D as being like Guskabe, or Guskab, sort of this like man from nothing. So nobody's ever really asked me about this because I feel like very few people outside of like Indigenous people in Maine know of, and maybe like academics know of like Guskab and his stories, but like thinking of him as the man from nothing, D just sort of like pops onto the page. And so he kept, like when he said that to me, I was like, holy shit. I was like, where were you when I was writing this book? Like, I feel like that's something I could have like used as like really good material to work into it. But nobody's ever asked me about that, but it would be, and I don't know, like I didn't do it intentionally or anything. So like my answer to that would be like, oh, was that purely accidental? But I just find it fascinating that there's this really cool correlation between, I think, him as a figure and D as this like also this person who's just kind of like, because I feel like Guskab or Guskabe, in one of the stories, he just kind of wakes up on the ground, and that's kind of like how we see D, not on the ground necessarily, but just him, on his way somewhere. Like that's how the whole book begins.
Yeah. And often the best things happen without trying too hard.
Yeah.
Because if you tried to force that, it would maybe show through too much.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe it's good he didn't give me feedback early on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have to read the thing again to how you do that with some insight, and then you read something for the second time or watch it, and you're like, whoa, how did I miss that? So yeah, that's really interesting. That's great. I don't know if anybody else has any questions before we let Morgan go. But this has been a really great, a really intimate conversation, and I love hearing you read. It's nothing like hearing an author, present their own work in their voice. It's really wonderful. So.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all so much for being here. I know a bunch of people have left, but I was super happy to see them all here.
Yeah, it was great. Well, we can't wait for the new book, and and just everything else that you get involved in, Morgan. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, and I'll keep you posted on it.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
take
everyone.
care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.